Brown, he said, would you help me with my case? And I said, well, Charlie, I don't want to hurt you. He looks at me, he says, Brown, I got no money. He said, I got a 20-year sentence. I've been down 7 years. I can't make a parole. He said, you can't hurt me. I said, well, on that basis, I will take a flyer, all right? So I'm thinking, I'm looking at this case, and I said, okay, I knew how to use the indexing system because a guy named Harold Smith, who was the law librarian there, took me up and down. I think it took all of about 90 minutes, and he showed me how to use the indexing system, all of which is now in Chapter 4 of the Lawsuit Cookbook. So I'm thinking, okay, what do I do next? I don't really know the procedure here. So I sent a girl over to the Terre Haute courthouse. There was a case called Garofalo versus Benson. And here comes your first lesson in how to read legal citations. Now, Garofalo versus Benson was the name of the case. Garofalo was the prisoner. Benson was the warden. And the citation was 505, Fed 2nd, 1212. I forget it was a Seventh Circuit case, and I forget the exact date. I think it was around 1972, I believe, not really sure. Okay. Now, what this tells you is this first number is the number of the volume. We're going to go back over this because you're not getting out of here until you learn how to do this. We'll shut the doors if we have to, and nobody escapes till you learn it. 505 Fed 2nd, that's the volume number. Well, you can tell that it's a 505 because it's right there on the spine of the volume in the law library. Fed 2nd means Federal Reporters Second Series. The first series began in 1880. They had about 300 of them, ended around 1926. Late 1926, they went to the Fed Seconds. And then about 1993, they went to the Fed Thirds when they hit 999. And this right here is merely the page number. This stands for Seventh Circuit, means Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. It's headquartered in Chicago, covers Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And this is the year the case was decided. Well, anyway, what I did, not having a whole lot of experience in how to do this sort of thing, is I just sent this girl over to the district court where Garofalo had won it at the district court level. The government appealed it, and he also won it in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. And I said, just go over there, buy the file, all right? And she did. She brought it back to me, and the first thing I noticed was this guy couldn't spell. His grammar was terrible. His punctuation was off. But I saw how he did it. I saw what he did. I saw what the prosecutor did. I saw what he did in return. I saw the judge's ruling. In other words, I had the whole file. And I thought, aha, okay, this is all I have to do. Now, this was in front of a judge named S.U. Dillon. I later named a white German Shepherd after him for reasons I think you can figure out because I won't use foul language in front of the ladies here, all right? Anyway, S.U. Dillon, I take the exact same thing Garofalo had done, submitted on behalf of Charlie Cox, and the same judge does a 180 and tanks us, concerned meaningful consideration for parole. And I'm thinking, what the heck? So the night my world is destroyed, I'm thinking, geez, nothing works here. So I'm out in the yard with a guy named Mayberry. Now, Mayberry, he won a Supreme Court case on contempt of court over 30 years ago. He was quite a jailhouse lawyer in his day. And I'm sitting there with Mayberry, and Mayberry looks and says, Brown, he says, appeal this. You'll win it in the Seventh Circuit. I did, and I did. Okay, and I did the same thing with the appeal. I just sent somebody up to get an appeal brief, looked at it, and said, okay, here's the format, here's the argument, and I just plagiarized everything and won it. Of course, they gave the credit to some lawyer. Now, I also pulled the same stunt, because if you get the file, we're going to go over this and over and over and over. One of these cases is in your workbook, where we basically just bought a copy of a lawsuit. Another time that I pulled this stunt was I got a call from Larry Flint's brother, Jimmy Flint. This was back about 1985. And I was out in Utah at the time, and Larry Flint's former bodyguard, Roger Dean Pack, was in the pound in Memphis at a time with my former running partner, Harold James Jinks. When I was in the joint, Jinks took care of all my minor annoyances because he was like 6'8" and 280, and nobody whipped him since he was about like 15 years old. And they'd heard through Roger Dean Pack, through Jinks, that I might be able to help him because Jerry Falwell had sued them for $10 million. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I think your magazine stinks, but if you'll allow me to write articles for you about the corruption in the prison system and the legal system, then I'll take a look at this case for you. And they said, okay, fine. So I ordered a complete copy of all the paperwork in this case, Falwell versus Hustler, and it was about this big. But at the same time, I thought, Falwell sued Penthouse before and he lost. I want to see what he did there too. So I ordered the complete file there also. So I'm winding up with like 612 pages of this nonsense at 50 cents a page. So I go back to the original case and I thought, uh-oh, we got a problem here, because the same lawyer that had defended Penthouse against Falwell and won was now working for Falwell. And I thought, oh, you guys have got a problem, okay? So I go through all the pleadings on Falwell versus Hustler, and I find one piece of paper. This is something else. Write this down, okay? Any civil action, the entire case on any civil action, I don't care if you have a mound of papers that's this high and goes across the room, is going to depend on 1, 2, or at the most 3 documents, and all the rest of it is just crap. You just have to go through it to find out what it is. Okay, now here was the document I found in this one. And this is why this is so critical, because if you get an idea that you're going to look at a stack of papers this big fighting somebody else's case, and I'm going to show you how to do that here directly. I'm going to show you how to fight someone else's case without being a lawyer and without getting into the jackpot, and it's perfectly legal, and the example's right there in your workbook. Anyway, I get down to this one particular page, and here's a letter. Now, what this whole lawsuit started over was a really obscene cartoon about Jerry Falwell and his mother in an outhouse the first time, okay? Basically, they were saying, in this cartoon, they were saying he was committing incest with his mother in an outhouse. And I told these idiots, I said, you people got no common sense. I said, even if you were on good legal ground, you knew he had to sue you, Well, I get about halfway down through this pile of paperwork, this 300 pages. And there's this one letter. This is their whole case, all right? From a lawyer named Kahn out of New York City, their corporate legal counsel. And he had reviewed this cartoon and said, well, I don't see anything here that's defamatory. And I'm thinking, where did this guy come from? Did this guy get his bar card last week? And so Jimmy Flint came back to me and said, okay, Brown, he says, how do we get this thing derailed? I said, there's only one way that you can get it derailed, but there's another way you can mitigate damages. I said, okay. So the first is you can challenge jurisdiction, because this thing was filed in Lynchburg, Virginia, but you guys are operating out of Los Angeles. So that's where it should be. Well, they lost that one in the United States Supreme Court. I said, now, the only other avenue of escape that you have, I said, you're looking at $10 million here. I said, the only thing that your attorneys can do is they can look at what this attorney did to them. I said, now, the only way that you have a chance of surviving this case is you're going to have to convince a jury, hey, look, we may have screwed up, but it's not our fault, it's this lawyer's fault. Apparently they did it, and it worked, because the $10 million that Jerry Falwell was looking for, and by the way, Hustler has lost cases for $10 million before, shrunk to $300,000. And of course, then they turned around and stiffed me, because as soon as the case was over with and they'd gotten what they wanted, I said, okay, it's time for you guys to pony up. They forgot who I was. Maybe it's what I got for dealing with people like that. But again, 1, 2, or at the most 3 documents on any given